Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Curator's Radar. Today, I am very pleased, even more than I've always been, to host artist and educator and general cool guy, Zach Lieberman. If you haven't seen him, you should go check out his Instagram because his feed is amazing. He's a digital artist who works like every day making a different piece of coded work. And they're all very vibrant pieces that he's been producing for. How long have you been working, Zach?
I think I've been doing this kind of practice for about 5 years.
Wow, yeah, 5 years. Yeah, I think I started following you around then, like 4 or so years ago. So yeah, I've been every day watching a new one and being like, wow, how does he do it? It's amazing. It's very interesting to see someone working specifically with code. Can you tell us about how you got started?
Sure. How I got started generally, or I'm not?
Oh, actually, can you tell us about how you got started generally and then going into your project specifically?
Sure. I am based in New York. Quick introduction. I work as an artist and educator. I am originally from Evanston, which is a small town suburb of Chicago. And I came to New York for college and I studied fine art and I loved it. I spent all of my time in the printmaking studio. I was really happy. I just I loved everything about the printmaking studio. I just loved the culture and the vibe, and I can remember everything as if I'm there right now. I had to get a job. At that time, everybody was talking about web design and Y2K, and the world's going to end in the year 2000. So I was graduating in 2000. And so I got a job as doing web design for, I guess you would say, Web 1.0. And I didn't have any background. I didn't have any experience. I didn't have a portfolio. I kept going to interviews and people would look at these slides of my paintings and be like, who are you? What are you doing here? Somehow I got a job. And on that job, I learned Photoshop, I learned Illustrator, and then I learned this tool called Flash. And I think there's many people who are in my field who got their start with Flash. And if you're not familiar with Flash, it was this tool that you could use to create animation online on the web. And it was a cool interface. It had a timeline. You could say, I want this object to move from here to here and just set keyframes. It was like really like a kind of surprisingly interesting interface. But it also had coding. So you could, instead of just setting keyframes, you could say x equals x plus 1 and have an object move. And I had always loved animation and I never knew how to code it. I didn't know how to make animation, but let alone code it. But here was this tool where you could type something and you could just type a line and see something come to life. And that struck me. I got excited about it. I went really deep. I tried to learn as much as I can, learn the language. And then I went to graduate school, and at graduate school, I learned other languages and fell in deep. I didn't know. I still thought, okay, I'm going to be a graphic designer. That's my route in life. And I thought I'll design book covers and I don't know. And then I didn't know, but here was this thing which I loved: movement. I loved just tweaking and adjusting and seeing things. Yeah, just playing with language and movement. And then I went to graduate school and kind of fell in love with this. And since I graduated, have been doing, I guess you would say, media art since 2002.
Yeah, and almost yearly you get an award as well.
Yeah, I don't know, but I've done a lot of stuff. I've been around for a while, and
Yeah.
different waves come and go.
Then we jump to 2016 when you started your daily sketches project.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that then?
So I was going through, I guess you would say, this sounds sort of cliche to say, but like midlife crisis. My father had passed away, and I was trying to figure out some way of working. So I was struggling with that. And when my father passed away, it was very bizarre, but I had to join Facebook. Up until that time, I had not had a Facebook account, but I actually had to join Facebook in order to read what his friends were saying and to join in that conversation and the celebration of his life. Everybody was on Facebook. So I remember I was on the airport heading back from Europe. I was installing some artwork and I was heading back to Chicago. And I joined Facebook And from there, I joined Instagram and joined these different social media platforms. And
One thing led to another.
yeah, one thing led to another. And I was thinking, I want to work in a different way. I was really frustrated as an artist. One of the things is you get excited about a project, maybe you get a grant or a commission to make a work, you go head for 3 months or 6 months deep into a project and make something, and then you release it, and maybe it's successful, maybe it's not successful. But I was feeling really frustrated with the pace of making and experimenting, and I wanted something that would feel fast, like where I could just make something and I could also not worry. And I was teaching and I wanted my students not to worry as well. Like
Interesting.
I wanted to figure out like an approach to making where I don't worry about doing something. I don't worry about it being a cliche. I don't worry about it being successful or not successful. I just want to make, and I want to understand myself better, and I want to understand my intuition better. And these platforms proved to be really valuable. Instagram at that time had only 15 seconds of video, but I found
That's true.
I could do 12. If you take the sine of elapsed time, that gives you something that animates like a cycle in 6 seconds, 6.28 seconds, and then you could get two of those in 15 seconds. And I loved it. It was so great to just wake up every day and say, what am I going to make? And it also, around that time, my stepdaughter was having a lot of trouble falling asleep, and she wanted my wife or I to be in the room when she would go to sleep. And so I would hang out with her, read a book and talk to her, and then I would just hang out with my laptop and make something. And then in the morning I would show it to her. And it was a way for me to be like hanging out with her and then just showing her this creative process, and she would get excited and she'd give me feedback and she'd tell me what to change, and so she became my art director.
That's great,
And
actually.
and then I just it takes me in different directions. I love it. It's really, it doesn't feel like work. I actually use it as a way when I'm working, when I
hmm
want to take a break, it's like a way of relaxing. Like it's really relaxing to make these sketches.
That's amazing. I've actually read the story about your stepdaughter, and I think it's very endearing. I've read also that you started inputting the concept of reflections into the works, and I wanted to ask you what other kinds of, well, what other concepts in this line have worked out best throughout the years?
So there's a few, and I find I keep coming back to certain ideas, and they're almost like a kind of safe space. And I think part of the creative process is navigating safe space versus unsafe space, or things that you feel comfortable with and things that are totally uncomfortable and new and strange and different. And there are these sort of safe zones that I feel like I understand really well. So like blobs, I will always be happy to make a sketch with a blob shape in it. And I think, and I'm like really like in love with the form and in love with the shape. And I could go very deep in that realm. Or I do a lot of sketches that involve spatial division. So thinking about
Oh yeah.
like regions of space expanding and contracting. I do a lot of explorations in color and gradients, and I go back to those spaces because I understand them, but also I want to see them with new eyes. And so sometimes I'll explore an idea. Oftentimes the sketches start with a gesture or a kind of movement or a simple graphical form. Like here's a line that's made only out of half circles, or here's this blob shape. But then I will come back to it a year later, 2 years later, with a different eye, with a different sensibility or a different intent. And it's really
hmm
nice to navigate the known and the unknown.
It's difficult to expand more on the works without seeing them. I really recommend everyone to go to your feed. Each one of them is like a whole universe of its own. I'm looking at them again right now. The ones that you put out 2 hours ago, I actually really like, by the way, the
Oh,
square
thank you.
ones. Like for me, it's every day. I've been seeing them for a long time.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask as well. Sorry. Oh yeah, which of the recent projects that you've been doing are you the most proud of?
that's a good question.
Hmm.
I'm really happy. So my partner Momo and I have been exploring the body and gesture and doing almost like kind of augmentations of dance and movement. And I love these sketches. We were doing these experiments in the fall where she would go to the studio. She was taking these kind of really strange choreography workshops from Israeli choreographer, and she loved it. And
Nice.
then she would go to the studio and practice the movements and then record them and pass me the footage, and I would run the footage through Runway ML and get a kind of clean silhouette of the body and then bring that into my software and start to build augmentations on it. And I love this kind of process of collaborating with my partner.
Hmm.
And we've been doing, she has a nice idea around monuments. And so she built these kind of pedestals, and we've been inviting different people in New York to dance on them and then augmenting their bodies. And so that is stuff that I feel really passionate about. I recently, or today, I just did some work for the New York Times that just came out, like the New York Times Magazine. And
Yeah.
I enjoy this kind of editorial illustration. And yeah, I don't know. It's been very slow because a lot of the work that I really love is exhibition. So I really
Hmm.
love kind of setting up interactive work and seeing people interact with projects. And
I wanted to ask about that as
yeah,
well.
so that's been so slow because of COVID,
Ah,
but it's coming back. And yeah, I'm quite excited
yeah,
about.
slowly. We're all ramping up again.
Yeah,
Yeah. Actually, which exhibitions of your work have you found the most rewarding in real life or digitally?
I think for me the most, probably the most exciting one recently was at the Muda in Zurich. I think it's like the Museum of Digital Art in Zurich. And it was so great. When they invited me out, they said, "We really want to show your work. We have to tell you, we have very little budget, but we will make your trip really fun and we'll make it worthwhile and we'll do a really good job." And I was like, "Okay, let's see what this is about." And come out to Zurich, and every day some different person on the staff cooked a meal. It was like home cooked meals from the staff every day, and just like really fun. Like everybody's joking and having a good time. And the thing that I was so impressed with is they have this amazing design sensibility. They took, for example, like the work that I had done on Instagram and said, okay, let's set up 8 projectors and we'll have this
Oh, wow.
transparent wall and we'll do it in a zigzag and we're going to show all of your sketches like in a kind of generative way. And it was very cool. Like they pushed me. They had really interesting ideas. They pushed me. We found a way to show AR. So AR is really hard to show in a gallery. Like
Yeah, definitely.
you have a AR app on your phone, like how do you show it? And they built a mobile, a hanging iPad. So they had this like
Oh,
hanging from the
wow.
ceiling. They had a bar with a weight on one side, and the iPad is literally hanging from its power cord. They 3D printed something, so it looks crazy dangerous. Like the iPad is hanging from a lightning cable, and then it was so beautiful. Like you could walk around the room, and there was like a circular track that this mobile encouraged you to walk in, but then you could go low or go high. And I had an experiment that I had made with just one of my daily sketches where I recorded audio in space. And then when
Hmm.
you walk with the iPad, when you walk through the audio, you hear it again. And it was so beautiful to like I had no idea how to show it in a gallery. And then they just
Yeah,
engineered this like amazing solution. So that was one of for me that was really special to see my work in that way. And then I have been doing you mentioned reflection. I have this project called Reflection Studies, which is
oh,
basically
yeah.
a light table, and I have a camera from above, and you put down pieces, and you can see what the software is simulating light, how light would reflect off of those shapes. And I have set that up in some outdoor light festivals. So there's Signal Festival in Prague, and then I was in Sweden, in Stockholm, and set it up in a kind of outdoor light festival. And it was really, I think it's really beautiful, like doing large projection and having people interact.
Exactly.
I just loved it. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it's amazing how through technology and a very creative mind, you end up creating that new sense of interactivity and
Yeah.
new frontiers in general. Briefly, could you mention what tools you use working your programs in general?
Sure. So for the most
Hmm.
part, I use a tool called Open Frameworks, which is a
Yeah.
tool that I helped create a while ago. It's a C plus open source toolkit for artists. So basically, it makes, if you're familiar with processing or other sort of creative coding toolkits, it's like that. It's like a creative coding toolkit, but written in C plus. And the idea is to make it easier for you to load a movie or load a font or load a sound. And so I've been using open frameworks for a long time,
Hmm.
since like early 2000s. So I know it really well. And for me, it's a very fast tool to prototype on. And then I also use JavaScript. I do some web
Okay.
stuff sometimes. Vanilla JavaScript, P5.js, Pixie.js, 3.js. I find those really like amazing tools for making things. I use Python sometimes. I do a lot of scripting, but the majority of time, like if you were to say, what's your most common go-to tool?
Open frames.
Yeah, open frameworks.
Yeah.
I have Xcode open.
Mhm.
It's just something that I know super well.
Yeah, just to check, you're able to code in real time and visualize the images in real time.
When you code in C++, you recompile your app.
Yeah.
So you write code and then you press play, and
Mhm.
it might take 10 seconds or 15 seconds for you to see like the compiler does some work, smashes everything together, makes an app. I also do shader programming where you can
Mhm.
literally you write code, for example, for a fragment shader. I just reload the shader every 60 frames or something.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
that's pretty much real time. Like you change the
Yeah.
code in the shader, you press save and you see it, and that's a very different way of working. So I found I actually alternate. Like sometimes I'll do sketches like the ones that I posted today. Those are
Mhm.
shader based code. So
Okay.
the open frameworks part of it is just drawing an image on the screen, but that image is coming from the shader code. And so it's like a really fun and weird way of working where you almost have not to say you have no intuition, but because you can change the code so rapidly, it feels like
Mhm.
jazz. Like it feels really like unstructured and fun. So.
That's great, actually. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how do you visualize the code that you write, and then are you imagining it yourself, or you can answer that you can see most of the time?
I think sometimes, so that's a good question. Sometimes I have
Mhm.
a very clear vision of what I want to make, and I might start with a sketch or something in my sketchbook on a piece of paper or
Okay.
some notes. And then I kind of work backwards from that. And sometimes I have no idea and I don't know. And I just say,
Start
let me
from
just
scratch.
try. And I find one thing that I really like to do is try thinking about geometric operations almost as filters. So the
Mhm.
same way you might, I don't know if you're noodling around in Photoshop, you might load in an image and then say, let me try to blur it. Let me try this filter. Let me try this filter and just see how you can push things in different directions. And I like to do things like, let me try to rotate it. Let me try to extrude it, revolve it, and try almost using geometry or geometrical transformations as a kind of as a filter to
Mhm.
see what does this thing look like from this vantage point, etc.
It's a process of experimentation and play, seems right.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, and I think there's just so much beauty in kind of very simple geometry and geometrical transformations. So I just want to see I like the idea that sometimes I'm loading in images and sometimes I'm loading in especially the gestural stuff based on the body, but
Mm.
sometimes when I sketch I just love the idea that it's all math. It's just
Oh
math.
yeah,
Like I'm basic like everything is numbers and I'm
I've
trying to
thought
find
about that as
some
well.
yeah, trying to find some beauty there and to make stuff that like doesn't feel like math, it doesn't feel like computer graphics, it doesn't feel like creative coding, but feels like a poem or a painting or something weird, something I haven't seen before. And for me, that's the goal.
Creating poetry out of just numbers in your screen. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. Yeah, I can't agree more. And on a little bit of a side note, what kind of recommendations would you give to an upcoming artist who's trying to work with tech or learn new programs and things like that?
Yeah, I would say I have a lot of advice. One thing that I think is really important is to find community.
Mm.
So I think it's just a lot of this stuff. So there's information, there's tutorials, there's books, there's lots of different ways of getting started. But the best thing is to find other people, whether it's online or in person, whether it's like you go to a workshop or you take a class or you're joining a forum or a mailing list. Find other people who are interested and curious about the things that you are and talk to them, because a lot of this stuff is hard. It's just hard to have all in your head, and it's hard when you get started. Like programming, making art with code is one of these things which is incredibly frustrating for beginners because
Yeah.
you start typing, it's a lot of it is muscle memory and typing, and like you're missing a semicolon, small stuff that you can't see or can't understand. And but somebody that's been doing it for longer than you, 3 months longer than you, a year longer than 10 years longer than you, can look at your code and say, oh, you're missing this, or
Hmm.
your for loop is not constructed or whatever. And you just need other people to help you get unstuck, and then very soon you're helping other people get unstuck. Like you start as the person who asks a lot of questions, and then at some point you become a person who answer some questions. And it it's like bizarrely oral in a way. The way we learn code and the way we talk about code, a lot of it is through conversation. A lot of it is through asking questions and answering questions. And you can get books and you can get resources and materials, but to be able to have somebody who understands it answer a
Yeah.
question, like that's going to get you unstuck. So the first thing I always say is it really important, really crucial to find community or to build community around what you're trying to learn around this field. And then the other thing I would say is that one of the biggest challenges of coding is that you're both like the criminal and the detective. Like it's a very strange way of working where you're committing the crime and you're solving the crime. And so it's just it's really challenging. It's fun. I love it. And I teach people, this is what I do for a living, is teach people how to use creative code in their practice. But I think there are some people who can really learn it on their own, but I think it's just important. That community aspect is just so crucial.
That's key, definitely. Yeah. It's very, I think I've dabbled a little bit into C+. I worked a little bit with Unity. So I know more or less, I know the feeling of getting something to not work, but I also know the feeling of when it works, and it's very rewarding. Yeah. Let's switch it up a little bit about community. What do you think about the art world in general?
The art world. Yeah, I sit outside of the art world, to be honest.
That's what I want to ask.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The media art, there are some media artists who have really a lot of success in the traditional art world, like what you say, gallery or so on. But I have found that a lot of my success has come from media art festivals or different types of museums, or even, for example, like there is a curator at Museum of Modern Art, Paula Antonelli, and she's done amazing exhibitions, and she's a design curator, and she's brought in myself and my friend, like folks from this creative coding community. She's exhibited our work, and she's got our work into the MoMA, but it is like through the design. It's not coming in through the, I always feel like we're coming in through the back door. And I went to meet her once. I went to go have a meeting with her, and she literally opened the back door to the MoMA. I really feel like we're coming in through the back door. But right now, there's this kind of crazy moment with NFTs and people selling work online. And that's, I think the fine art world is crashing into that. And I think there's interesting moments in the near and less near future where this work, I think, will become a more important part of the language of fine art discourse. But I don't know that world really well, to be totally honest. I have friends who are in that world, but I don't feel like I'm part of it.
Yeah, you have your own space for now, at least.
Yeah.
I didn't want to dabble too far into NFTs, but do you have any opinions about them?
No, I would say the following. I think it is really interesting. It's a strange moment. And, and it's been amazing to see how, like, violently, some people really hate this. Some people really think it's just, and there are real valid concerns and valid criticisms of it. There are people who love it. I'll be honest, I've been reading a lot and researching a lot and thinking about it a lot, but I don't have really well formulated thoughts. I would recommend, there's a podcast, Addie Waganak did a podcast with Hyperallergic about this, and she has thought a lot about this, and I found that really great. I love the work there's a podcast called Interdependence. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst have done some really interesting kind of work in the space. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. It's like everybody's timeline feed, and it's also, it's blown up. It's having a kind of moment, but it's not something that I feel really I have a clear. I don't have a clear position on it yet. I'm definitely curious, but
Yeah, same here. I'm a little bit torn about it. Great for artists, really bad for the environment. But let's talk about something else. Back to your work. One question that I wanted to ask is, what's the most important constraint that you put to your workflow?
I think the important constraint, like, it's different, right? It's different for my commercial work when I'm working in an exhibit or so on. But for the daily sketches, the constraint is that I try to post as quickly as I feel like I've made something where I've surprised myself. So I really am trying to make myself happy and make myself surprised. And I always feel like the challenge as a creator, you want the publish button to feel really easy to press, right? And when you're young and you feel like you're just making something, you don't feel like it's good enough, you don't want to share it, you feel, there's so many doubts that you can have as a person who's making something, right? You can just have these, your head is just full of this voices, and the voices are telling you, oh, don't publish it, don't put it out there, you're not worth it, it's not worth it, people are going to hate it. There's so many challenges to just putting stuff out there and doing the work, and just feeling like when I press publish, I feel like I'm
Surprise yourself.
surprise myself. So I don't know. I would say that for me is the kind of framework that I have.
Hmm.
But then there's other times where there's different frameworks that help you, that really increase creativity. So for example, I got excited about augmented reality and using ARKit or ARCore, these kind of technologies that Apple and Google put out so that you could get device information about the device, where it is in space. And I was noticing when Apple put out ARKit that summer, all I saw were these terrible demos of floating globes on a coffee table, or Star Wars characters, or just people are just loading in 3D models. And in the studio, I thought, let's set up a rule. And the rule is no external content. That
Okay,
everything
nice.
that in this AR app should come from the AR app itself. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to load assets. I'm not going to load pictures. I'm just going to try to take elements from the world. I'm going to try to take data from the camera, data from the microphone, data from the movement, and just see how I can use it, and really ask questions. What does it mean if we have a camera, a speaker, a microphone, and display in space? How could that allow us to ask questions about what is a camera, what is a speaker, and for me, that constraint led to a lot of kind of creative output. So I feel like there are moments where constraints can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Let's see. I think I'm gonna go for my ultimate question that I always ask
Yeah.
to artists, and probably the last one as well, because it's been a very fruitful conversation. You have so much to tell, and yeah, it's so interesting. And I have to say, from the other side, I can really tell that you want to surprise yourself and the viewers. It's
Mm.
yeah, definitely every piece that you put out, it's very rewarding
Mm.
to watch, and you can feel that there's all that creative input in there, and all that thought and theory as well. But what could the internet do better for you as an artist?
Ooh, that's a
Mm.
really good question. I think we can always have better. We're always struggling with ways to share work. And in particular, I'll describe, I think the constraints around how we share work really affect work. So for example, I share my work on Instagram, I share it on
Mhm.
Twitter. I'm thinking constantly about the sort of time limit, like things have to be under a minute, and I'm using H.264 compression, so certain types of things look terrible, certain types of things look great. And there's a genre of work that I love that involves lots of lines and that just can't compress well.
Oh yeah.
It will just look like garbage. And sometimes I post it anyway. I'll post it on Twitter and I'll get these comments like, "Oh, Twitter killed your artwork." And I post it anyway because I want people to use their imagination. You
Hmm.
can look at it and imagine how cool this would look. But I think those protocols and those algorithms, they affect the decisions that you make. You get rewarded for gradients and soft transitions, and you get penalized for grids and lots of lines and lots of noise and detail. And it I would say if there were better vehicles for sharing motion work, and for something between, for example, like Vimeo or some service where you're really putting a kind of high quality,
Yeah.
large scale movie up, versus Instagram where you're posting like a 1 minute, short clip. If there was something in the middle, that would be really interesting, or something that allowed you to share work in different ways.
Mm.
I Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
For
I think
sure,
that
one
was a
of the
great answer.
yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
think also for sure when I came up, it was so the web felt a lot more vibrant, and I think
mhm.
it is we've been overrun by wall, walled gardens. And
Yeah, for
I spend
sure.
a lot of time in Instagram. I spend a lot of time in Twitter.
We all do.
So you, but I do miss the kind of like weirdness. Sometimes the
Mm. Early
web would feel,
2000s web, yeah.
yeah, it would feel so weird and vibrant when you go to a website and it's really surprise you and transport you. And I do think a lot of our interfaces are so flat and our
Mm.
experiences of artwork are so flat that it I think that's something that I wish there was more of in kind of I hope for this new web.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's actually a great answer. Hopefully, someone at Google listens to this and it frees us of their bland interfaces and lets us go back to even before MySpace.
Yeah, but I think it's also it should come from outside of these companies. Like these
Yeah,
companies
for sure.
are great, but they have the stories that they want to tell. Like for example, Google. A lot of my friends work for Google, or I've had projects that are sponsored by Google that work for them.
Yeah, it
But
happens.
they have a story that they want to tell. They have a narrative, and
Hmm.
but I think it's really important for artists like to know like that's a power and that's a force you can use it, but also there should be a space for outside of these large companies because they are increasingly like a, an integral part of all of our lives in very kind of major ways. And I think we need more spaces that are weird, that are different, that allow us to explore the world, outside of those dominant narratives.
I think that's been a great way to end it as well, giving us hoping for a weirder internet.
Yeah, weirder internet for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zach. It's been a pleasure. And I hope to maybe one day see your work in person myself, actually.
Cool.
Maybe come to London or Spain as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm actually in Madrid. I'll do something in Madrid in later
Okay.
this spring. So I don't know when, but I have been chatting. What is it called? So I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, sure.
I've been chatting with a group in Madrid, and it's called MAD. They do this thing called the Urban Digital Art Festival.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I think I know it.
Yeah, and I'm going to do something on a 10-meter by 3-meter high curved LED screen. So it's like a very beautiful, very long screen, and I've been going to design some visuals for it. So
Is it?
unfortunately, I won't be able to come to Madrid this time, but I'm going to make some animation.
I'll be there seeing it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mm.